Have you ever wondered if you could get into legal trouble for something someone else said? Not something you told them to say, but something they just blurted out on their own. It sounds kind of crazy, right? Well, in the world of law, it's a very real thing called a vicarious admission. And today we're going to break down exactly how it works.
So let's paint a picture. Imagine a company delivery driver. Maybe he's running late. He glances at his phone for just a second, and bam, he hits another car. He immediately jumps out, runs over and says, "I'm so sorry, this is all my fault, I was checking my phone." Just a totally honest, in-the-moment reaction.
Okay, here's the big question. The person he hit now wants to sue the delivery company. I mean, they're the ones with the deep pockets, right? Can they walk into a courtroom and use that driver's confession against the company itself? Our gut reaction is, yeah, of course. But, the law, it's rarely that simple. What we're talking about here is this legal idea of a vicarious admission. All it means is that a statement from person A can be used as evidence against person B. And this is a huge deal because normally what people say outside of court is considered hearsay and you can't use it. Vicarious admissions are one of the most important exceptions to that rule.
But before we get into when this is allowed, we've got to talk about a really common situation where it's not. You'd think that if two people get sued together, as co-defendants, that what one says can be used against the other. Makes sense, right? Well, the law is super specific about this.
The general rule is actually pretty straightforward. Just because you're on the same side of a lawsuit doesn't mean you're tied together. An admission by one defendant cannot, by itself, be used against a co-defendant. One person's confession doesn't automatically take everyone down with them.
And this leads to one of the weirdest, most mind-bending results in the entire legal system. So check this out. In some old divorce cases, you could have this exact situation. Person A confesses, yes, I had an affair with person B. Okay, so the court uses that statement against person A and finds them guilty. But what about person B? Well, A's statement is just hearsay when it comes to B. So if there's no other evidence, the court has to find person B not guilty. So legally, person A committed adultery with B, but B did not commit adultery with A. Wild, right?
And hey, if your brain is spinning right now, you're in good company. The legendary legal scholar John Henry Wigmore basically said the same thing. He called this outcome perfectly logical, but also perfectly and absurdly artificial. The logic follows the rules, but the result just feels wrong. It feels like it's from another universe.
All right, so if just being co-defendants isn't enough, then when can someone else's words be used against you? The law is looking for a special kind of connection, a relationship called privity, where it's like one person is legally standing in the other's shoes. So let's look at when that actually happens. It really boils down to three key situations. First, there's predecessors in title. That's like when a previous owner of a house says something about the property line. Second, referees. This is when you literally tell someone, go ask that person for the answer. And third, the big one for our story, agents. Think employees, representatives, that kind of thing. The referee rule is pretty easy to grasp. Let's say the executor of an estate tells an investigator, look, I don't know the details about the assets. Go ask Ross. He knows everything. Well, they've just made Ross their official spokesperson on the matter. Whatever Ross says from that point on is treated exactly as if the executor said it themselves. They're stuck with his answer. Okay, let's circle back to our delivery driver. This brings us to the most common and, honestly, the most confusing category, agents and employees. This is where the rubber really meets the road in these cases, and it all hinges on one critical word, authority. And this, right here, is the absolute key. The most important question the court asks isn't just, was this person an employee? No, it's way more specific than that. The real question is, was that employee actually authorized to speak for the company about this specific thing? Let's look at two classic cases that really nail this difference. In one, a station master told the police he thought one of his employees was stealing. That statement was allowed in court because part of his job was to manage security, to put the police in motion. But in another case, a night inspector told a customer that their cattle shipment was forgotten. That statement was not allowed. Why? Because his job was to manage cattle in the yard, not to be a company spokesperson about past mistakes. And that leads us to the single most important rule to remember in all of this. An employee's authority to do their job, drive the truck, manage the station, is almost always way, way broader than their authority to make official statements about their job. So to get an agent's statement into court, you've got to check 4 boxes. 1, the person was actually an agent. 2, they made this statement while they were still working there. 3, they said it to an outsider. And 4, the really tough one, the statement was part of a conversation the agent was actually authorized by the company to have. Okay, we've laid out all the rules, we've seen the weird logical loops. Now it's time for the payoff. Let's go back to that street corner and figure out what happens with our car crash. So let's put ourselves back at the scene. The driver, totally apologetic, has just said, "It's all my fault, I was on my phone." Now that you know all the rules about authority to act versus authority to speak, is that statement usable against his company in court? And the answer, which blows most people's minds, is almost certainly not. That heartfelt, honest admission of fault on the side of the road, it's probably not admissible as evidence against his company. And you know why by now, right? The company hired him to drive a truck. They did not hire him to make statements about legal fault on behalf of the entire corporation. His authority was to perform an act, driving. It did not include the authority to speak for the company about the legal consequences of that act. In the cold, hard logic of the law, that confession is simply outside his scope of authority. So what are we supposed to make of all this? Well, it shows us that we're in an area of law that, while it has its own internal logic, can create outcomes that just don't feel right to our everyday sense of fairness. If you remember just one thing from all this, make it this sentence right here. Authority to do acts is far wider than authority to speak about them. The law basically separates the hand from the mouth. What an employee is allowed to do is huge. What they're authorized to say is tiny. At the end of the day, these rules are built on their own strict logic. It's a system designed to protect companies from being on the hook for every single off-the-cuff remark made by every employee. The logic is consistent, even if, as Wigmore put it, the result feels absurdly artificial.
And that kind of leaves us with a bigger question to chew on, doesn't it? When a law is perfectly logical inside its own system, but the result it gives us feels unfair or just plain weird, which one is right? Should the law change to match what we feel is just, or should we change how we feel to better understand the law?